In a galaxy where genius is measured by complexity and power, one quiet human cadet did the unthinkable. She used a childhood science trick to outsmart the brightest minds in the universe. What began as a simple reaction sparked a chain that rewrote the rules of science itself. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's jump into the story. The Helios orbiting Science Academy floated above the planet Ura 6 like a glass flower in space. Its dome shimmered with colors from distant stars, a quiet beacon of learning in the dark. Inside, the brightest minds from across the galaxy gathered to study and challenge the laws of science. Some had tentacles, some breathed plasma, some didn't speak at all, only communicated through light or scent. But all of them were considered brilliant. And somewhere in the middle of it all sat one human student, quiet and unnoticed, Rinna Vale. She sat at the edge of a long bench in the main lecture dome, her eyes calm, her posture still. Around her, alien students chatted in strange languages, some floating, some glowing, all excited. Rinna didn't join in. She rarely did. Most didn't even speak to her, except to make a quick joke or comment about how primitive humans were. She didn't mind anymore. She was used to being overlooked. In fact, she preferred it. Professor Nalcor hovered into the center of the dome. His body was made of thin strands that pulsed with soft light. He was known for his intelligence, his strict rules, and his dislike of shortcuts. He didn't care who you were or what species you came from. He only cared about results. His voice came through the translator field, calm and cold. Today, he said, you will each build a reaction. It must be safe, non-lethal, and made only from neutral compounds. No genetic tricks, no fancy equipment, no shortcuts. Just chemistry. A quiet wave of murmurs rolled through the students. This was the pure element challenge. It happened once every cycle and was known for exposing who truly understood the basics and who is only smart because of their species' special powers. You have 3 days, Nalcor continued. Impress me, and you earn access to the advanced labs. Fail, and you'll return to the basics where you belong. The room shifted into motion. Students rushed to terminals to claim their lab pods. Rinna waited her turn. As she walked to the assignment terminal, a tall insect-like student whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "Maybe the human will show us how to boil water." Laughter followed, but Rinna didn't react. The terminal beeped and assigned her to Pod 24 on the outer ring of the academy. It was small and quiet, just how she liked it. Her lab pod hissed open, revealing a clean workspace with a round bench, storage vaults, and a display wall. She sat down, opened the ingredient database, and scrolled through the approved list. Most of it was very basic. Neutral buffers, mild acids, salts, and a few gels used to stabilize mixtures. All very safe, all very dull. But tucked near the bottom of the list, she found 2 compounds that sparked an idea. Sodium bicarbonate, acetic acid. In simple words, baking soda and vinegar. She smiled a little. It was something she had used on Earth in school. A silly experiment, some might say. But she knew better. It was more than a fizz. If done with care and precision, it could be used to create a chain reaction, one that wasn't explosive, but alive. Back in the other pods, chaos was already unfolding. Students began mixing glowing powders, magnetic gels, and sound-based liquids. A few tried to impress by using the biggest containers or the brightest lights, but Rinna worked quietly. She chose a small model made of simple resin and designed it to look like an old Earth volcano. It wasn't for show. She had a plan. She adjusted the pressure chamber inside to control how quickly gas would build. She added a tiny valve that would release the gas through a curve, allowing it to mix into the air in a specific pattern. She wasn't just making a reaction. She was shaping it. Outside, students were already setting off test reactions. One student melted part of their lab wall. Another caused their gel to float out of the container and stick to the ceiling. Each mistake brought a warning from the Academy drones. But none of them slowed down. Rena ran silent tests. She adjusted temperature curves. She measured how fast the foam would rise. She checked the density of her stabilizing gel. Everything had to be just right. She didn't care if they laughed. She didn't care if they rolled their eyes. She wasn't trying to make a show. She wanted to prove something that didn't need shouting or explosions to be powerful. On the final evening before presentations, the other pods were filled with flashing lights and nervous chatter. But in pod 24, there was only soft light, quiet, work, and the gentle sound of foam rising in a practice run. Rena watched the bubbles with a careful eye, adjusting the nozzle one last time. She didn't want applause. She wanted understanding, and she believed the reaction she had built simple, steady, controlled might just open more minds than any spark ever could. The day of the demonstration arrived with a hum of excitement and pressure thick in the air. The grand chamber of the Helios Academy was full of motion. Floating platforms buzzed with students, and instructors circled slowly above, their observation drones blinking like tiny stars. Each student was allowed one moment on the central platform to showcase their experiment. It was a chance to impress, to stand out, to prove they belonged in the galaxy's most elite science program. Rena stood at the edge of the chamber, holding her volcano model in both hands. It looked small, almost childish compared to the sleek, glowing, and complex machines other students rolled out. Some had crystal towers glowing with heat signatures. Others had spheres filled with liquid that shimmered and danced like living things. Everywhere she looked, there were flashing lights, floating wires, and dangerous beauty. A few students passed her without speaking, though one a tall green-skinned cadet named Jurin slowed, just enough to glance down at her volcano and laugh. Under his breath, "Did someone bring arts and crafts to a science contest?" he said, loud enough for others to hear. Another whispered, "Maybe she thinks it's a school fair." Rena didn't respond. She just held her model steady and waited. One by one, the demonstrations began. Jurin went first. His project used a liquid frequency coil to manipulate sound into visible shapes. When he turned it on, glowing waves pulsed into the air, forming a spinning ring of music around his head. The class clapped. Professor Nalcor gave a slow blink of approval. Another student, a floating form made of flickering gas, ignited a controlled chain of colored explosions inside a sealed chamber. The colors shifted through the air like a dance, and the crowd watched, impressed. One by one, the students delivered grand shows, some brilliant, some unstable, all very loud. Rena's turn came last. Her name was called, and the room grew a little quieter. Some leaned forward in curiosity. Others sat back, arms crossed, expecting a joke. She walked to the center and gently placed her volcano model on the platform. It sat there, gray and dull, surrounded by empty space. Professor Nalcor floated closer. His strands glowed faintly, his expression unreadable. "Miss Vale," he said, "I trust this is more than decoration." "It is," Rena replied, her voice steady. He said nothing more and moved aside. The room waited. She pressed a small button hidden near the base of the model. There was no flash, no bang, no heat, just a soft hiss. Foam began to rise slowly. From the top of the volcano, white, thick, and steady. A few students chuckled. One even snorted. "Is this a recipe?" Someone whispered, "Where's the baking tray?" But then something subtle happened. The foam released a thin trail of gas carbon dioxide, harmless and nearly invisible. As it drifted upward, it moved through the demonstration dome's air. That air, still filled with trace particles from earlier projects, began to react tiny. Flashes of light sparked where Rinna's gas touched leftover mist from a failed experiment. A faint swirl of purple formed above the volcano, twisting gently in the current. Around the room, floating instruments began to beep. One of the drones flickered, its sensors recalibrating. The audience fell silent. The foam continued, not explosive, but exact. Its gas reached the corner of the room, where a mist from another reaction still lingered. The two combined, forming a thin spiral of glowing blue. A moment later, another student's leftover heat signature caused that spiral to split into two. The air shimmered as patterns began to spread, slow but sure. Professor Melkor leaned forward. His eyes, made of layered lenses, widened. The foam hadn't just caused a reaction. It had started a chain, a silent, subtle activation of leftover materials from half the students in the room. And it was controlled. Every movement of gas, every flicker of light, had direction. The environment was reacting to Rinna's experiment as if it had been waiting for it. The students stared, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew it wasn't normal. The room felt different. Brighter, tighter, as if something had shifted in the air. Even the smell changed to soft. Citrus scent rolled through the chamber as the gas met a floating stabilizer. Professor Melkor slowly turned toward her. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low. Rinna folded her hands behind her back. "I didn't create a new reaction," she said. "I built one that could respond to what others left behind." The professor stared at her, then at the growing spiral of soft color and movement filling the dome. It was beautiful. Not dramatic. Not loud, but connected. Every floating spark, every trace mist, every leftover compound had become part of her display dot. What started as a joke, as a laugh, was now something no one could ignore. Rinna didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She had done exactly what she came to do. And for the first time since the challenge began, no one in the room had anything clever to say. A hush wrapped itself around the grand chamber, so complete that even the hum of the air filters seemed to fade. Rinna's volcano continued its gentle hiss, sending a steady ribbon of gas into the dome's wide space. Nothing about the plume looked powerful, yet every leftover particle it touched shifted color, shape, or motion. A faint lavender halo circled above the volcano, shaped by the dye from Jurin's sound display. Farther out, delicate threads of blue light awakened, stirred by ions left behind when the floating gas student powered down. Each new swirl pushed a tiny fragment of air into movement, and that movement nudged another, then another, until a soft breeze began to circle the entire hall. The professor's observation drones realigned with quiet clicks, lenses whirring, as they struggled to track the spreading changes. Their instruments' temperature, humidity, molecular density flashed figures no one had seen in a controlled lab before. The dome's display band projected rippling statistics, but numbers were useless now. The room itself had become an equation still solving. Some students leaned forward, eyes wide, sensing the air pressed gently against their skin, as if the chamber were breathing with them. Others backed away, unnerved by the silent power they could neither hear nor smell until it reached them. Rinna watched the pattern unfold, her hands relaxed at her sides. She noted how the lavender halo began to fade once it consumed the last of Jurin's dye, how the blue threads brightened when they brushed a patch of residual heat from the ion coil. Everything connected in ways simple models never predicted. It was like seeing invisible lines between every experiment, lines she had traced in her mind while the others chased shock and awe. Now those lines glowed for all to see, sketched in gas and light, Churin, the green-skinned cadet who had mocked her, stepped forward, confusion replacing his earlier arrogance. He lifted a long finger as if to prod the air, then stopped, sensing. The spiral wind curled past his arm. How is this possible? He whispered to anyone who would answer. No one did. The floating gas student, whose experiment had left the ion residues, drifted closer to Rinna, wariness in his shifting glow. "You did this with baking soda?" he asked, voice flanging through 2 sets of vocal folds. Rinna nodded once. "The compounds weren't the trick," she said softly. "The room was." Professor Nalcor hovered high above the platform, strands, pulsing a deep amber that signaled intense thought. He rarely revealed emotion, yet now his lights flickered in rapid burst surprise, calculation, maybe even a trace of respect. He opened a private channel to the hall speakers, so every ear heard him clearly. "Attention," his calm voice rang out. "All active scoring is suspended. Observe only." His decree carried weight. No student dared write notes or whisper theories. They simply watched, caught between curiosity and caution as the invisible breeze thickened, moving their robes and scales in a gentle current. The cascade reached a cluster of crystal shards left over from a failed light refraction test. Those shards began to resonate faintly, singing a single pure tone. The sound wasn't loud, but it vibrated in the bones, a steady hum that harmonized with the air's slow rotation. Every color in the room shifted by a fraction, as if tuned to that note. Even the lighting panels along the ceiling dimmed in response, the automated system mistaking the new brightness for a spike in ambient glow and compensating. Rinna hadn't planned this exact outcome, but she recognized the branching logic. Once ions met carbon dioxide in the right ratio, sound waves propagated differently. What seemed chaotic was merely uncharted order. Murmurs arose again, not of mockery, but of awe. A timid avian student with bright feathers stepped forward, captivated by a ribbon of green gas spiraling past her talons. She extended a feather tip into the flow. The gas bent around it like water around a stone, splitting cleanly, then rejoining on the other side without losing form. Rinna marked the observation silently. The plume was cohesive enough to part and heel-proof her stabilizing gel inside. The volcano's valve was working beyond computer predictions. The entire hall now glimmered with soft, living patterns. Corkscrews of gold dust, bubbles of faint pink haze, and ghost-thin sheets of silver that shimmered then vanished. Each pulse of movement echoed another, building like overlapping ripples on a pond. Yet nothing about it was dangerous. Heat stayed within safe bounds. Toxicity monitors showed neutral readings. It was a masterpiece of complexity born from the simplest reaction in the galaxy. Professor Nalcor lowered himself toward Rinna until they faced each other across the volcano. "Explain your intention," he said, voice still carrying to all corners. Rinna met his many-layered eyes. "Everyone here builds to control," she answered. "I built to listen. I mapped the way your dome breathes after each test, the gases, the ions, the leftover heat. Then I designed something small enough to speak the right first word." She tapped the volcano's side. The room finished the sentence. A pulse of quiet spread after her words, deeper than silence, because it held understanding. Students realized that while they had reached for spectacular power, Rinna had reached for context. She had woven their failures and successes into a new fabric none of them could have imagined alone. Respect replaced disbelief, settling over them like the hush before dawn. The final phase of the cascade began as the remaining foam in the volcano slowed and stilled. Without fresh gas, the spirals of light thinned. The lavender halo broke apart, and the singing shards softened into silence. One by one, colors faded back to clear. Threads of ion drifted downward and the gentle breeze calmed. Within minutes, the chamber looked almost as it had before, except for the stricken wonder on every face. Professor Nelcor straightened, strands bright with cool blue. "Class," he declared, "the pattern you witnessed is now archived as the Veil Cascade." His voice carried no sarcasm. "Study it. Remember it. Complexity without harmony is noise. Simplicity in tune with its surroundings is the purest art of science." He turned to Rinna and gave the deepest bow his species could perform, body, folding in on itself like silk. A collective gasp rippled from the students. No one had ever seen him bow. Rinna's cheeks warmed, but she kept her eyes steady. She knew this moment was bigger than praise. It was proof that listening mattered in a universe shouting for attention. As drones recorded the final data and the audience slowly dispersed, many paused to give her silent nods of respect, even gratitude. Rinna remained by her quiet volcano, hands resting lightly on its cool surface, wondering what other hidden patterns waited in the stars' patterns no one had seen yet, but that she now knew could speak if someone built the patience to listen. After the demonstration ended, the hall didn't fill with applause. It wasn't that kind of moment. The silence stayed with them, even as the last traces of Rinna's reaction faded into the air. Students walked slowly from the chamber, talking in hushed voices, as though they had witnessed something sacred. No one had expected a quiet volcano to change the way they saw science, but it had. Rinna remained by her experiment until the room was nearly empty. She gently packed the volcano back into its case, not rushing, not smiling. Her mind wasn't on what had just happened. It was already thinking of what might come next. Back in her lab pod, the lights felt too bright and the air too still. She placed the volcano on her shelf beside her notes and sat down. She didn't feel victorious. She felt restless, like something had opened that couldn't be closed again. Her reaction had worked, not because it was powerful, but because it listened. And now, she couldn't stop hearing possibilities. Her fingers hovered over her tablet, tempted to start another design. But before she could, the room chimed softly. A message had arrived. She tapped the screen. It was brief, marked with the seal of the Academy. "Report to Professor Nalcor's chamber, now." She stood without hesitation. No time for nerves. The professor's private chamber was hidden deep in the administrative tower. Most students never saw it. It was said to be where the hardest conversations happened, where students were either chosen or dismissed. The corridor leading there was narrow and curved, lit by soft pulses of blue that seemed to follow her footsteps. At the final door, a sensor scanned her presence and opened without sound. Inside, the room was vast and floating. There was no floor, no clear direction, just soft gas, glowing threads, and the professor himself suspended in the center. He turned toward her slowly, his body folding and stretching in silent motion. "You understood more than I expected," he said, his voice quiet but clear. Rinna said nothing. She knew he didn't ask for replies when he spoke that way. "Most students chase control," he continued. "They build machines that force reactions to obey. You did the opposite. You joined the environment instead of fighting it." She nodded once. "That was the truth of it. I've already submitted your name to the Academy Board," he said. "The Council on Terran Integration is searching for a scientific delegate. Earth has few voices in our experiments. They need someone who thinks. Like you do." Rinna blinked. "You're recommending me for the council?" "I am," he said. "Because you didn't just solve a problem. You revealed the flaw in how we think. We teach complexity as progress. You reminded us that awareness is power." She hesitated, heart racing, but I didn't plan all of it. I only knew the dome would respond. I didn't predict every outcome. "That's what makes it more important," Nalcor replied. Real science listens before it acts. You observed the failures of others and gave them meaning. You didn't outbuild them. You outthought them. She took a breath. The idea of representing Earth, of stepping into rooms filled with older, louder voices, made her nervous. But another part of her, stronger now, was ready. She had proven something not just to others, but to herself. That even in a galaxy filled with brilliance, the simplest voice could still be the most surprising. You don't have to decide today, Nalcor added. But know this, your moment has created ripples. The board is already reviewing how we define success. Your spark didn't just light a reaction. It rewrote the rules. She thanked him quietly, then drifted back down the corridor. The academy outside his chamber felt different now. The students she passed no longer looked through her. They nodded. One even smiled, gently. Not as a joke, but as recognition. When she reached her pod, she didn't sit. She stood at her workbench and opened a blank slate. No instructions. Number. Assignment. Just space to build something new. Her hands moved before her mind fully caught up, sketching lines, shaping ideas. She didn't need permission. She had already changed the game. Outside the window, the planet Eurosix spun beneath the academy, clouds shifting across its surface like paint in water. The stars above were quiet, distant, waiting. She watched them for a long moment and whispered to herself, "Now let's see what else they're not expecting." The volcano sat behind her, still and silent. But in every mind across the academy, it still fizzed with quiet power. Not because it had been flashy, but because it had made them see their own work differently. Because it had started with something everyone thought they understood, and turned it into something none of them had imagined. Rina didn't need more explosions or praise. What she had sparked was far more lasting. A reminder that brilliance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply bubbles up when the world is finally ready to listen.